The Confession of Leo Taxil about Freemasonry. Part 2. These quotes pertain directly to the Freemasonry hoax. Quote 1. Do not get angry, my reverend fathers, but do laugh heartily when you are told now that what did happen is the very opposite of what you expected. There wasn't the shadow of a dedicated Catholic exploring the high masonry of Palladism under a false nose. But, on the contrary, there has been a freethinker who, for his own edification, not because of any hostility, came into your camp and strolled, not during 11 years but during 12, and it is your servant. Various reactions, murmuring, laughter. There wasn't the least Masonic plot in this story, which I shall prove to you shortly. We must leave to Homer, singing the exploits of Ulysses, the adventure of the legendary Trojan horse. That formidable horse has nothing to do in this case. Today's tale is much less intricate. Your servant told himself once that having gone for a religion too young and possibly with too much spirit, it was well possible that he might not be aware of the true situation. Then, not acting in anybody's name, willing to change his mind if there were reasons to do so, and trusting no one at first with his decision, he thought he had found the means of knowing better, of ascertaining better, for his own instruction. Add to this, if you wish, a touch of prank at the back of his temper. He wasn't born in Marseille in vain. Laughter. Yes, add the lovely pleasure, that most people ignore, but which is quite real, the intimate joy of playing a good turn on an opponent, without malice, just for fun and to have some laughs. Well, I must say so at once, this 12-year-long prank taught me something valuable from the start, namely that I had acted without moderation indeed, that I should have better stayed on the ground of ideas, and that in most cases, it had been a mistake to make personal attacks. I feel bound to make such a statement, and I also admit that I make it easily. During these 12 years spent under the banner of the Church, and although I registered as a prankster, I realized how wrong it is to impute the malice of some people to doctrines. It results from mankind itself. A bad man remains bad, just like a good man acts with goodness, whether he keeps his faith or loses it. Dishonest people as well as honest ones are found everywhere. Marks of approval. Accordingly, I made for myself a study which has borne fruit. That study gave me the equanimity, the inner philosophy mentioned before. I came at first as a curious person, a bit at random, but of course intending to withdraw once the experience had come to its end. Then, the sweet pleasure of pranking took over, overwhelming everything. I lingered in the Catholic camp, gradually developing my plan of an altogether amusing and instructive mystification, and giving it ever broader proportions as things went along. In the course of time, I happened to secure 2 collaborators, not more than 2. One was a fellow I knew since childhood, whom I took at first for a ride, and to whom I ascribed the pseudonym of Dr. Bataille. The other was Miss Diana Vaughan, a French Protestant, rather on the free-thinking side, a professional typist and the representative of one of the typewriter manufacturers in the United States. I needed both to achieve the success of the last episode of this joyful prank, which American newspapers call the biggest hoax of modern times. Many laughs. Murmurs. Quote 2. Of course, this last episode had to end in April, the month of gaiety, the month of pranks, and let us not forget that the hoax also started in April. On April 23, 1885, this last episode is the only one which has to be explained today, though in broad terms only. because if everything was to be told and secret aspects disclosed from the start, it would take many days. This April Fool's catch brought home a gigantic whale. Explosion of laughter. Quote 3. 1 year earlier, the sovereign pontiff had made himself notorious with the encyclical Humanum Genus, and this encyclical agreed with a well-established idea of the militant Catholics. Gambetta had said, "Clericalism, there is the enemy." The Church, on the other side, said, "The enemy is Freemasonry." Accordingly, slandering Freemasons was the best way to establish the foundations of the colossal prank of which I savored all the suave happiness in advance. At first, Freemasons were indignant. They did not foresee that the patiently prepared conclusion of the hoax would result in a worldwide outburst of laughter. They actually thought I had joined for good. It was said and repeated that it was a way of avenging myself for having been expelled from my lodge in 1881, a well-known story which was not in the least dishonorable for me, but the mere consequence of a little row initiated by 2 men having nowadays disappeared, and disappeared under sad circumstances. Quote 4. Let us leave this aside, and summarize facts. Since my goal was to invent all the elements of contemporary devilry, which was a good bit stronger than the city under the Lake of Geneva, it was necessary to proceed step by step. Foundations had to be set. The egg from which palladism was to be born had to be laid and incubated. A prank of this size cannot be created in one day. Voice. Obviously. From the first moment of my conversion, I had found out that a certain number of Catholics strongly believed that the name Grand Architect of the Universe, adopted by Freemasonry to designate the Supreme Being, without relating it to the particular way of any specific religion, that this name, as I say, is used in fact to skillfully conceal Master Lucifer or Satan, the devil. End quote. Note. Here was see that Taxil was the one responsible for perverting the great architect of the universe, which started with Christianity. Quote 5. Accordingly, my first books on Freemasonry consisted in a mixture of rituals, with short innocent parts inserted, apparently harmlessly interpreted. Each time an obscure passage occurred, I explained it in a way agreeable to Catholics who see Master Lucifer as the supreme Grand Master of Freemasons, but only with a touch of suggestion. I was slowly smoothing the field first, in order to plow it later on, and then scatter the mystifying seeds which were to sprout so well. Quote 6. An audience with the Holy Father. After 2 years of this preparatory work, I went to Rome. Voice. Here we are. Received at first by Cardinals Rampolla and Parocchi, I had the pleasure of hearing them, one as well as the other, tell me my books were perfect. Yes, indeed, the books unveiled exactly what was so well known in the Vatican. And it was truly fortunate that a convert published these famous rituals. Laughter. Cardinal Rampolla called me, my dear, thick as thieves. And how much he regretted that I had been only a mere apprentice in Masonry. But since I succeeded in getting at the rituals, nothing was more legitimate than printing them. He said he could identify therein all his previous readings from documents in the Holy See's possessions. He identified everything, even that which, by my doings, had the same worth as the sharks of Marseille or the city under the Lake of Geneva. Voice. Rascal, scoundrel, blackguard, rogue. As for Cardinal Parocchi, what interested him most was the question of Masonic sisters. My precious revelations had taught him nothing new either. Murmurs on one side, laughter on the other. I had come to Rome unexpected, unaware of the fact that a request for a private audience with the sovereign pontiff must be made a long time in advance, but I had the pleasant surprise of not waiting at all, and the Holy Father received me for 3/4 of an hour. Voice: "You are a ruffian." To win this new game, I had played it safe during the first evening I spent alone with the Cardinal Secretary of State. Evidently, he had been entrusted with my preliminary examination. But the impression I wished to give him was that I was somehow exalted, not quite as much however as the good canon of Fribourg. Laughter. The verbal report which Cardinal Rampolo must have given to the Holy Father granted me the reception I desired. Since the time of my admission under the banner of the Church, I had convinced myself of a basic truth, namely that one could not become a good author if one does not put oneself in the body of the person one represents, if one does not believe, at least momentarily, that all of it is true. When a scene of despair is played on the stage, tears should not be faked. The third-rate actor wipes dry eyes with his handkerchief. The artist cries actually. Voice: "Rascal, rascal." Which is why, along the morning before my reception, I filled myself so completely with the situation that I became ready for anything and incapable of flinching despite any kind of surprise. Speaker's voice gets momentarily lost in tumult. When the Pope asked me, "My son, what do you wish?" I answered, "Holy Father, to die at your feet, right now. This would be my greatest happiness." Laughter. A listener. Respect Leo XIII. You have not right to utter his name. Leo Taxil. Smiling. Leo XIII deigned to tell me that my life was still very useful in the fight for faith. Then he touched upon the question of Freemasonry. He owned all my new works in his personal library. He had read them from one end to the other, and insisted upon the satanic guidance of the sect. Having been an apprentice only, I had great merit to have understood that the devil is there. And the sovereign pontiff stressed on the word devil, with an inflection, which is easy for me to render. It seems that I can still hear him repeating, "The devil, the devil." When I left, I was sure that my plan could be carried out to the end. The important thing was not to stand out any more, once the fruit was ripe. No. The tree of contemporary Luciferianism began to grow. I gave it all my care for a few more years. Then I rewrote one of my books, introducing a Palladian ritual in it, allegedly obtained in communication, in fact prettily fabricated by me from beginning to end. A listener. And we have to hear that. It is disgusting. Leo Taxil. No. Palladism or Luciferian High Masonry was born. The new book had the most enthusiastic reception, including all the magazines issued by the Fathers of the Society of Jesus. Quote 7. The time had come now for me to step aside, otherwise the most fantastic hoax of modern times would have failed sadly. I started looking for the first collaborator I needed. It had to be someone who had traveled a lot and who might be able to describe a mysterious investigation in the Luciferian triangles, in the dens of this palladism described as secretly directing all the lodges and back lodges of the entire world. I happened then to meet again in Paris with an old college friend of mine, who had been a doctor aboard ships. Starting from the determined idea that Freemasons worship the devil, and convinced of the existence of palladism, He discovered the most extraordinary things behind the Hebrew words used as passwords, etc., in the innumerable degrees of Masonic rites. Sashes, aprons, ritualistic tools. He scrutinized everything. He examined the smallest embroidered figures on the most insignificant pieces of material. Having belonged to a Freemason and, in the best faith in the world, he found my palladism everywhere. Among the most joyous times of my life, I will always recall the hours during which he read his manuscript to me. His thick volume, Freemasonry, Synagogue of Satan, was a wonderful help in convincing my doctor friend that there truly was a secret Luciferian meaning in all of the Masonic symbolism. In fact, the doctor did not care a rap. But he had really studied spiritualism out of curiosity, as an amateur. He knew that believers in supernatural manifestations, phantoms, ghosts, werewolves, etc., existed throughout the world. He knew that within small groups of occultists, likable pranksters let specters appear to good people, who forgot all of Robert Houdin's technique. But he did not know that such operations ever occurred in Freemasonry. He did not know that there was a specific rite of Luciferian and Masonic occultism. He knew nothing of palladism and of its triangles, of the elected wizards and of Templar mistresses, and of all the astounding supreme organization imagined by me, the existence of which became scientifically established through the productions of Monsignor Murren and others. End quote. Note: here, we see that Taxil is not Abba lying to his friend, only to later reveal the hoax. This has been part 2 of the partial confession of Leo Taxil, and his hoax on Freemasonry. Please see the link on this video's webpage for part 3, and the link to the complete written confession, as only the portions concerning Freemasonry were used here. The end.